The welcome back. Gosh, this time last week I was sad. I mean, happy. It was very beautiful. I mean, not like some who are on lakes enjoying beautiful scenery, but everywhere I thought, I know my students are suffering. They're hurting now. I see you laughing, yeah, but I thought they think I'll get off my syllabus. Nay, nay, I am going to make that up. Now, I have the sense that some of you might think, because it's March, it's time for you to take spring break and you want to hit the beaches and party. You understand Panama City can be a little risky. I would be sure to behave and have your ID with you at all times. But for those of you who are more serious, we're going to be doing the first half of the 13th century. So you have to balance those two. Make up your minds which way you want to go. The road of Sodom and Gomorrah or the road to Jerusalem. Yes, that will be here, the big J. So that's Jerusalem.
Usually.
Because, yes, the Society of Jesus will understand. What we're going to do today will include, of course, everything up to the Plantagenets, if I make it, because this will end the Norman period, and a very interesting period it is, as Frank has indicated to us, because there are accidents both of alcohol abuse and of, shall we say, misbehaving in the forest. At least that's what I think. The middle son, actually not the eldest, of William the Conqueror is this individual here, according to a 19th century portrayal. William Rufus, so called because of a red beard, which is not what he has here, but Rufus Red. So he was named for his father, but that, other than a love of the military and love of material possessions, money, would put him in line with his father. But being the middle child, he gets the kingdom because that's what William the Conqueror wanted. He did not like his eldest son, which is unfortunate, but that eldest son became, by heredity, the Duke of Normandy. Now, this will be a time of separation of the two territories, as you can see, which is not the way it was meant to be, but that's the way it happened, ever so briefly. This new king, as I've said, was interested in financial acquisition and in military operations. He was king for a number of years, actually, 1087 onward after his father's death. Luckily for him, this was when crusading was really, as we would say, cool or hip or something like that. If you wanted to be, sort of in the groove, you wanted to go on crusade. Some of you will remember the year 1095. And if you don't, you have me. 1095, the Council of Clermont, the Pope called it. He was supposed to be one of the greatest sermons, and in terms of excitement of the audience, Odo Bayeux was there. I mean, it was a place to be at this council because everybody was going, God wills it, and We got to really get those Muslims and let's go get them. And everybody, I mean, it's a real pep rally. Urban II was the Pope's name in case that's on the vinyl. Okay. Because if you drop that at a party, you will be very, very celebrated or something. Whatever the or something would be more likely. The truth of the matter is that Robert was something of a gadabout anyway. So basically, he wanted to go on a crusade, but he doesn't really have a lot of money. And if you want to go on crusade, you can't just go. Well, I guess you can. I mean, there was the Peasants' Crusade. They didn't have anything. But I think if you're Duke of Normandy, you're supposed to be, shall we say, well-funded. So he pawns Normandy. Can you imagine? I've heard of these pawn shops where people go. You may know of them. I think there's some in Opelika, maybe. I don't think in our fair town, but such places. But can you imagine going to your brother who hates you anyway, but going to his brother and say, hey, I'm going on a crusade. I'm going to show my love of the Lord. So I'd like to pawn Normandy. And his brother said, well, that is really nice. I don't know what they say, these pawn people, but maybe they are real happy and appreciative of your business. I've never pawned anything, but that would be interesting. William apparently said, well, good luck. We all love the Lord. I'll have a mass said in your honor, you know, that kind of remark, which was certainly untrue because he could care less. But William now has pawn rights, not ownership, pawn rights over Normandy. And, you know, we all wave goodbye, adieu, and all of that to Robert off to serve the Lord. And he, of course, is now going to enjoy his rights there. Notice I say it is highly doubtful he had any intention of restoring Normandy. I don't think this was all legitimate. But if you're desperate enough, as Robert was, where am I going to get, as we say today, the funding necessary? Because Robert was really into it and see the world, adventures. Because this is the first crusade, folks. I mean, you're thinking of Richard the Lionhearted, all that comes later. This is the first. This is more like the Crusade of the Nobles and, you know, like get fired up and all that. I mean, we've had our pep rally. We're ready for action. And so he's gone a long time on that first crusade, as some of you know already. Meanwhile, William busy with, I think, a lot of, shall we say, military adventures and other excitement, will wait for the death of the Archbishop of Canterbury. You remember Lanfranc, many of you, who was William the Conqueror's great supporter. That was back in the days when kings and church people were tight. We love you very much. There is a sense of being a sycophant, and you know what I mean? It's like, I love you, sir. You're the sire. Yes, I am Archbishop of Canterbury, but gosh, I'm just doing God's work. And you are the king. You are like God's real representative on earth. And you say, but what about the Pope? Well, he's okay too, but the king is it. we're not going to have another Lanfranc. But Lanfranc had been designated by King William to take care of the transition. I was just talking to somebody about Louis VI, the King of France, who was in battle with William the Conqueror, and that's why William died. But he had the elderly Lanfranc help with the transition of, Robert and William, because those boys could be ugly. And now Lanfranc himself dies 2 years later. His successor as Archbishop 4 years later will be Anselm, a saint well known to many of you. Episcopalians, Catholics, I'm sure many. Anselm, like Lanfranc, was Italian, but a resident of Normandy. You say, well, what are all those Italians doing in Normandy? I'll tell you exactly what. They were Benedictine monks, and they were enjoying strong support from the Norman authorities because, we want to get to purgatory or heaven. So we better fund some monasteries, have those folks praying for us, because we do no sometimes. Well, how did Anselm get this post? Well, he didn't want it. He was considered for that day and age elderly, 65. You think, I know. I mean, to me, it's like a youth, but yeah, those kids. But at this point, yes. And he was an abbot of a Benedictine house in Normandy. And Lanfranc died, but it took Anselm 4 years. He claimed he didn't want it. It's sort of like, no, I'd rather I don't think he was comfortable with William Rufus, if you want to know the truth, because William Rufus let this position be open for 4 years. He said, I'll get around it. He said, why would he do that? Well, I don't think William Rufus was, quote unquote, very religious. And being avaricious, what happens is the profits, if you want to call them that, the returns on the lands of the Archbishop of Canterbury were going to the king, forwarding those checks. You think, well, that's not right. Oh. Well, I don't think William Rufus was exactly sit around and say, oh, gosh, I hope I don't get damned. But I would love those checks because he suffered from avarice. Money turned him on. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a vice. So you say, what can be done? Well, I'll tell you what can be done. William Rufus can get sick, very sick. And he's saying, sign. I'm getting a sign from above that I better get straightened out. Look at this. Again, I know, pretty cheesy, but that gives you the idea of like, I'm having an attack. My health is failing. Yeah, that kind of thing. And he says, boy, I want a new archbishop of Canterbury. Hear that, God? That kind of thing. It's like, so that's the thing. And poor Anselm, he said, I don't want that, Okay, if you insist. But, I mean, he could have had a nice retirement, I guess, 65, but this great authority, Saint Anselm, as we know him. So there he is receiving the crosier with all the clergy around him. And Saint Anselm said of this, I feel as if I've been tied to a young bull. I'm an old ox tied to a young bull. In other words, I don't think this is going to be a good relationship. It's like I suspect all that money that was going into the church, that king, avaricious as he was thinking, maybe I'll get some of it. It's like, and Anselm is now, once he gets it, seeing there getting that crosier, he's going like, well, I'm head now, so don't mess with me. And I'm sure he's more polite than that, but it is very icy, that relationship. I'm not aware of any good times in it. Anselm himself was of great note. If you take medieval philosophy, I'm sure you'd be on the front row and say, oh, I want to hear about nominalism and realism and all the different. I know. Philosophy, medieval philosophy, especially, can be very scintillating. The Catholic interpretations of Aristotle, we will forego most of that. I know. You're excited that I decided to let that go. As example, the proof for the existence of God and such as that. But understand he had had a wonderful career both as a Benedictine abbot and as a great philosopher. All of this was not impressive to William Rufus, I suspect, because he thought he would sort of turn over like Van Frank and just be his chum. And we're not ready for Henry II and Becket, are we? But just understand, Anselm was not willing to play that role anymore, because Anselm had gotten some, shall we say, new ideas about how churches ought to react to rulers. And of course, I go back to one of my favorites, Gregory VII, 1073 to 1085. Dates, you do. If you know them, good for you, but just understand that that's just special for you, not for everybody else. But because I won't attack you outside the class and say, well, no, go yourself the States. But understand the teaching was, of course, the idea that kings giving all of these authorities to bishops and such was wrong. Laymen giving power to clergy, I think not. And so that was this whole dispute, because, of course, like the rest of them, William wanted to invest, quote unquote, bishops and abbots. Invest means give them, you saw like a picture of that crosier. Oh God, that would have been just, he took it, didn't he? But then he said, it's coming to an end. It's sort of like, we need to move on. Kings don't need to be doing this. I'll accept land, if you want to provide me with that, but not church business. Because you're just a layman. You're a king, yes, but you kings are not always good people. Sometimes you are pretty sorry, I mean, check out David and Saul. Solomon. They've had some bad records. In any event, Anselm stayed a few years and he went into exile. He hung out in France. He would hang out in Italy, which I would like to do. But if you're Archbishop of Canterbury, you probably are unhappy. And I'd say not pouting, but more just leaving as a result, as a kind of resistance to the king, thinking the king would beg him to come back. He didn't. But this was a very, very bad business. And actually, he didn't come back for the rest of the king's time here on earth, shall we say. And that, of course, brings us, and Marnie, you told me you've been here, New Forest, right? So, yeah, and I mean, it's like, it's so unfortunate that early morning mist. And humans and Bambi seem so much alike, you know? We see that guy, then he's gone. Oh no, our poor king, we loved him so. Not. Yeah, I mean, that was right there in New Forest. And you know, you talk about the stages of grief. Well, one of the stages is get out your copy of the last will. Because the minute, boy, they barely get that arrow out of that man, you know? And they go like, gosh, that's a shame. Let's go to the bank. We are really sad. But what do? Our first stage of grief is to get the cash, get the money. And that is what's done. You say, gosh, I bet Robert, no, he's all fighting Muslims, remember? So he's not around. And who's around? The kid brother, little Henry. And you say, gosh, I wonder if he's avaricious too. Money, pecuniat, you're a Latin fan, whatever you want to call it. He's got it bad. And because it can be habits for me, I'm told. The avarice. So he gets the royal treasury, which is in the beautiful city of Winchester. If you ever want to go there, the cathedral is very beautiful, way down south. And the idea being that now he says, gosh, after that terrible accident, and the fellows who had been responsible for that mistaken, dear human error, they were given passage abroad. And you think, why are we leaving? I don't think you want to have a charge like that on you, king killing or regicide, I guess you call it. But whatever it was, the period of mourning was brief, very, very brief. He wasn't married. He had no, and I guess the soldiers missed him because he did like to party and he did like to have little military expeditions. But now, kid brother is the ruler. Cold, cunning, and avaricious. That doesn't sound like a good successor, but actually, we think of Henry I as being one of the great rulers. Maybe not a nice person, but those are two different qualities. If you're looking for lovable and cuddly and all of that, I wouldn't think of Henry I that way, but he certainly is important both in foreign and domestic areas as being an outstanding ruler. And he will hold both Normandy and England. Remember that still being pawned because we're not back yet from the expedition to the Holy Land. I imagine Robert is furious to find out about kid brother. But Now Henry gets a queen. And interestingly, Matilda is the niece of Edward the Confessor. And you're thinking, gosh, what an interesting genealogical situation. And to get you really excited, we going, yes, here's the forest, a big old tree just for you. Look at it, look at it. Go all the way down. See Edward the Confessor way over there. Now, this will not be on the phone. Okay. you just, I think it's just interesting to think about. You think they dated or they hung out? Yeah. King Henry and Matilda. Oh, baby, I've always loved you Anglo-Saxons. And living in Scotland. And maybe she wanted to come south and enjoy the good weather. But not that I don't love Scotland, I do. But more or less, she was the daughter, you see, of Saint Margaret. Yeah, and she was a real saint all the way down. So her credentials, she had the credentials as far as family. And I guess maybe Henry wanted in his choice of spouses to be a uniter. Let us bring together Scots and English. I don't know if he thought about it that way. Love and joy. Because he was still grieving over his brother's passing. The forest, yes. So this would be part of the way of dealing with it. She would become very, very important in a personal way. Robert, who his father called short stockings, and I suppose that has to do with the kinds of hose he wore, hurt hose. That's what it means. They all had different names. Henry was known as Beauclerk. All of this say Henry was literate, and which is an interesting facet to be aware of. In any event, Robert and Henry had it out. And the result, of course, was Robert would become a royal prisoner the rest of his life. And you know, he lived to be 83. Yes, I know. Prison is good for long life. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I guess he had they took real good care of him while he was there. He was, and you know, being a former Duke, I guess you would say, he got extra special care. I don't know if his wife, he had a wife and son. I don't know if they got to see him, hang out. Whatever the case, he was gone, indisposed. He was no longer going to be a threat to Henry because he could tell, I guess, the new guards and so forth about life in the Holy Land, and because he had some memories of food and all such. But Robert was no longer going to be a factor. And that, of course, was Henry's purpose, because Henry wanted it all. Now, one brother dead, the next one turned a lifer, as they say in those series. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not getting out, buddy. But again, to be 83 in the Middle Ages is darn good. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you can imagine what that would be like. He's buried in Gloucester Cathedral, way down south. And that is, I wonder how many people are interested in that now when they go on the tours. But it is a very beautiful, and of course, he is there in his warrior costume, which is, I suppose, appropriate. But he was there a long time, if you think about it. I mean, as a prisoner. He, I think he died only 2 years before Henry the First did. So, I mean, that's a long time behind bars, incarcerated. But I'll not let us think about that. Let's just think about the good times, the crusade, getting to go to the Middle East and how exciting that was. Now, Henry the First decided, I want the people in the church to do what I tell them to, but I better get along with them. And so his way of getting along with them was saying, all right, I won't try to invest the clergy anymore. And I'll let that go. And I think his representatives and Anselm must have met. And Anselm said, all right, I'll come back. I mean, he'd been on a long time and he was hoping for some sort of agreement. It didn't mean, it's sort of like I tell people, when I talk about, you remember the Concordat in 1929? Well, you don't remember, but between Mussolini and the church. And people say, does that mean that he would be at Mass every Sunday? And he wants to help out at confirmation classes? No, it means a concordat, a deal. And that's exactly what they will have. With Henry First and with Anselm, it's sort of like, you're back, we will work together more or less, but just don't get in my way. But it was not a warm relationship. And these are some illustrations from manuscripts, which are always interesting when you think this is from presumably monastic sources who are doing these kinds of illustrations, because we got plenty of time. It's not like we're going out for a long weekend or it's like we're here. So in addition to copying manuscripts, maybe we'll just put in a little illustration. And again, I assume these are confidential because it shows, you see the monks, you see the bishops, and there's the king. And he's resting, and look at what they're doing, how rude. They're poking him. And why are they poking him? Because he's going to hell. Yeah, this is just the first steps of what you're going to get. And you know why you're going to hell? Because you with your filthy lay hands touch that which belongs to God. Yeah. So go to hell. So look, I mean, you can see it there. And it's interesting to me when you see all of that and think this is not for public consumption, as if the monks would be using. You want to take a look at my manuscript? Now, I think most people had other things to do, cows, hogs, field work. I'm not thinking they were worried about that, but I think it's a beautiful illustration. And again, it's like if you're saying ratemyking.com, I'm not thinking they necessarily loved Henry. It's just that when we look at it, from the present point of view, he seemed pretty smart. But that's, of course, the long range perspective. Meanwhile, he was quite the politician, and that brings up one of the great, I think I would call it, constitutional documents. You say, as important as Magna Carta? Oh, nay. Nay. But I am saying that those who designed Magna Carta had this in mind. It all seems kind of political to us today. The Coronation Charter, it was called. And what it does, and again, Henry's stages of grief, losing his brother there and thinking about, now I'm going to be king. And I know God wants me to do a good job. And I want to love people. I'm not going to sing. I could do people and need people. But that sort of thing is to understand that in this coronation charter, he'll spell out things about, under my brother, you had to do this or be oppressed by that. And I'm going to correct you. It's going to be more like Uncle Edward the Confessor or Daddy, William the Conqueror. It's going to be righteous and good. That's the kind of king I'm going to be. Not like Willie boy. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's kind of ugly, but that's what he would say. And, nobody's going to disagree and say, gosh, but I thought William Rufus was a nice guy. Nobody thought that. Some soldiers maybe, but it's like now this coronation charter seems to indicate a king who is willing to say their boundaries. We have to consult with those dear people who lead the church. Gosh, we love the church because we're just a layman, we're a king. And while we are big in the lay world, we love and respect the authority of the church. You got to say all that. And at the same time, while we have great power, we respect the rights of our subjects, the lords, and all the little people out there. There are lots of them. But the idea is, of course, to put in writing some sort of statement about royal authority, how far it can go, and that will be very important when you read it. And some of you may have the book, and you actually see statements in it that seem shocking. Now, before we go on, you probably are asking yourself, how carefully did he follow these precepts? Not at all. But he said it. You know what I mean? It's like in later generations, like I said, but it was right here, people like that. It's like you didn't necessarily mean it, but since you put it down, you got to pay for it. Meanwhile, the king went on his way in terms of his authority. And of course, we are not surprised that one of the first institutions was financial. We all love and respect our friends at the IRS. I know, you can hardly wait for April. Get excited. Yeah. And because you want to support the authorities, I get that, and I respect you. Well, the British, or the English, I should say, excuse me, will design this body called the Exchequer, coming from a checkered cloth over the table where they were counting out money, profits. The Exchequer, which continued until the 1800s, if you can believe it, was the first major financial division. And the sheriffs, and we think of sheriffs in our American tradition, but in this tradition, they are more or less administrators. They are responsible to the royal government for the intakes and the outgoes. And they reported to the government. And you think, well, that's a lot of responsibility. I assume they were on the honor system. We love honor systems because we need honor systems to make sure when people are around funding projects that they are honest. Yes, I agree with you. But sometimes some people fall into wickedness and evil. Yes, yes. Yes, you know where I'm going with this. And you say, gosh, that's beautiful. Could you imagine this is your job every day? I mean, think about it. No. You think there's nothing easy. These are called pipe rolls. These manuscripts are all sewn together, these parchment. And what you have here are entries based on what you dispense and what you have coming in. And you think, do you think some of the sheriffs might have tried to embezzle or shortchange? Maybe that's why some sheriffs ended up handless. And you say, oh, I bet that hurt. I would think a removal of a hand could hurt, but you were very naughty. And what are the chances you're going to survive the taking off a hand? Not good, not good. So, yeah, that's the cost of being dishonest. You're not just going to you can't hang out with our favorite Duke, ex-Duke Robert, right? You're not going to that particular jail. You couldn't. Because you handled what was essentially royal revenues. They tell tales of it, and boy, could you imagine what Henry would do? Yeah, I mean, messing with my money, messing with my revenues. So these are called pipe rolls. And as I recall, in the Public Record Office in London, you put them on these easels. And then you had a little high chair that you could, like a little ladder. So you could climb up and read this in the abbreviated sort of business Latin. It sounds exciting, I know. We can talk about it sometime, day in, day out. Yeah, I know. I heard an ugly, ugh. But that was a sense of excitement, I suspect. Yeah. So now you can do all this online. I think it takes out a lot of excitement. Can you imagine? Just go to under the government. That must be nice. We'll
silence your phone.
Okay. Yeah, you can do that. Sorry to bother somebody. So basically then you have the information of where this comes from, and it makes for a very, very interesting you see up there, the king, up there, R for Rex. So that will make it. The justices in air were the king's men who actually were responsible for sending out their particular orders. If there were big kings, sort of like the king versus you, if you were a major lord. I mean, if you were like some petty person doing something bad downtown, Coomer's Corner, hooligan, that's not what the justices in there handle. I mean, you're just a local, troublemaker. So you can be handled in the local area, and you end up at some Lee County facility. But these are big shots. But the justices are very important because that's the beginning of a royal legal system. And it can be very, very important. Now you say, could they handle if you were a major figure in the church? Oh, no, we have a separate legal system for them. That was what was done by Lanfranc not that long ago. And I'm sure that the king is sorry that happened, but it did. Meanwhile, we also have what we call writs. And those of you, many of you who know our legal system far better than I, know about writs. And writs in this sense are basically orders from royal authorities issued by the king and very, very brief. I called them terse, but that is the point. They are, because you can imagine the number that were issued. Meanwhile, he does have the record, in case we need records, of the most special children. I say special because there were so many friends that he dated a lot when he had opportunity, and apparently he had a lot of opportunity. Now, you're saying more than Charles II. Yeah. Charles II, some of you who know Stuart history, he did a really good job. He had a lot, but 20 is the record. 20. And he cared, I mean, in a special way. He had great memories and special dates. But Matilda had 2 children, his wife. And apparently, with these other children, I mean, it's not like, are you sure? I mean, I think they all were treated real well. And they got nice jobs. So that was the way it was. Now, as far as having just the 2 children, that was, of course, a terrible shock for him. Maybe it would have been better to have more. I don't know. But 2 indeed was what he had, legitimate children. Now, you know, when you go back to William the Conqueror, who was also known as William the Bastard, you wonder why everybody gets so worked up about legitimacy. But in this case, there's 20 plus children. They were all well placed, as we're going to see. But the male heir, who was also named William, at the age of 17, died in an unfortunate accident. This was known as the White Ship Tragedy, as illustrated here. And I know, at least they'd all had a lot to drink. So you think, I mean, it's like, you know, it's maybe not quite as bad. You don't have time for a hangover. I mean, I've heard hangovers are bad.
Yeah, they're bad.
No, okay, thank you. Okay, yeah. And so you're not ready for a hangover, but you got the spirit, and so you're excited. And you may have known people like that. So anyway, they're all just, and nobody's going like, oh shucks, I better not. Everybody seemed to have been, I think they were all pretty young folks, sailors, and the heir and his bride, and the wedding party. They were all there. So now there is no male heir for Henry. He was married after Matilda died. But his second wife, I looked her up because nobody ever talks about her. After Henry died, she remarried and had seven, count them. That's a lot of children. I mean, so it wasn't her fault. I mean, fertility city, right? I mean, but none by Henry. So there you go. We'll never know the case of why there were no more heirs. You know he was trying. Because I'm sure that's why he remarried. I mean, getting over Matilda, I get that. So you're saying, baby, let's get busy and have some more children. And she said, oh, I'll try. But nothing happened. So he said, could I use a boo-boo as heir? No, that's gonna happen. I want a legitimate. Well, as it happened, his daughter, who had gone to live in Germany, marrying an emperor, not bad for the daughter of the English king. And guess what her name was? Matilda. Yes, we have lots of Matildas. Big name, but you can call her Mom for sure. She was a young widow. How convenient for Henry V. Henry's popular name, right? Yeah, name all your German Henrys and your French Henrys and your English Henrys. Can we ever get enough? But this was Henry V, the German emperor. And Henry was much older than Matilda, and there were no children. So, as you know, medieval royal relationships, you don't have that child. I know. And the husband dies, you're out, sister. It's not like, oh, we love you, just please stay around. I think they really were ready for her to head on out because she had not produced an heir. So she comes back, and the ever fruitful Henry, at least in his mind, was more or less saying, well, I can use Matilda. She's a widow, and you don't need to be a widow. We got some plans for you. And the plan, of course, was to marry someone closer to home, because you have no reason to stay, because they're not going to do you, oh, Empress this, Empress that. He's dead and you don't have a child. So, I mean, it's like, can I stay? I love Germany. It's a great place to live. You can call yourself Empress if that excites you, and it did. Matilda enjoyed her authority. But she's out, she comes home, and this is what she will end up with, the Count of Anjou. Well, it'll grow on. The Count of Anjou is a beautiful area right next to Normandy. When you go over there, the Angevins and that particular area. And Henry says, hon, I know you miss the emperor, but I've got somebody, maybe you all can just go out. Maybe share pizza, or, remember that first date and say, oh, this is the one. When he was 13, I'm not sure if he was the one. Remember when you were 13? I mean, it's like you're not necessarily the coolest kid, especially if you're dating a 25-year-old, you think that's a big difference. Not now, but it would be. You see the 13-year-old, he has to go to intramurals before you can go out, or he has sports. And do I have to? She's old, that kind of thing. But the king was not taking no for an answer, so they were married. Matilda, the 25-year-old widow, marrying now Geoffrey of Anjou. No one understanding at that point how significant it was going to be. Because, of course, they would essentially be the heirs of Henry I. Matilda had been very close to her father, but as time goes on and he grows up, Geoffrey and Matilda will be a formidable couple, and they will more or less be difficult for the king, that is Henry I. In other words, they want more and more authority in terms of ruling over this territory. And I can tell you this, those Norman subjects of Henry I were not exactly happy to have the Count of Anjou but we're all French and all that. No, not back then. It was more or less, we really are not comfortable in having an Angevin rule over us. But the Count of Anjou was now married to the heiress of Normandy and England. When Henry died in 1135, he was more or less, well, I hate to say, it wasn't a terrible relationship with his daughter and son-in-law, but they had relations that went from good to bad from time to time. And more or less, the king was somewhat tenuous in his succession plans. And that had to do with King Stephen. We'll talk about him momentarily. This little gem comes from 2016, and it follows the finding of the remains of Richard III. So I was just talking to somebody about Reading. Did we talk about more? Reading is one of those places I know from the rail stop, near Oxford. Isn't that ugly? Because I should appreciate, how would the Chamber of Commerce of Reading feel if they knew I'd said that? That sounds ugly, but a lot of people don't appreciate Reading. And when archaeologists, and this goes back, 2016, some years, almost 10, when they believed that somewhere in the remains of the abbey, which Henry I had found, they could find the remains of the king. And boy, did they get excited. Could you imagine if you were in the Chamber of Commerce and you were working on this project? Because you're so jealous of Oxford and Stratford. And they've got McDonald's, they've got, Popeyes, everything that we have. And they were thinking, wow, think of all the people who come to Reading, as a tourist site. Yeah. Could you imagine? They can make it like, oh boy, Reading is cool. I heart Reading, that kind of thing. But more or less, Reading turned out, they'll never know. We all remember Herman's Hermits, Henry VIII, yeah. Well, because of that nasty Henry VIII, Reading Abbey was more or less destroyed. And since that time, they've been, what we say, needle in the haystack, trying to pick out the remains of Henry I, but it hadn't happened. So that will be the mystery. We believe he's buried there, but we also know, and I think it'd be really interesting. And then I'm sure if you get a tourist brochure, they will have other sites that you can enjoy, just like we do here in the greater Upper Opelika area. We have lots of areas, and in Lee County. There you go. And it's near Oxford. I mean, I've been, the train ride is real nice. I mean, yeah. Can't say so much for the food, but I'll let that go. Now, how about another tree? And this tree is just to show us there's Matilda. And as we see, Jeffrey grows up. And well, yeah, I mean, you're 13, but then you get 3 vehicles. And they produce Henry I's grandson, who will be the first Plantagenet because of his father. People wonder what's the difference between an Anglo-Norman and a Plantagenet. Well, it's, of course, the Angevin connection. That is, Geoffrey of Anjou married to Matilda. And you always think, or at least I did, you remember Philip and Elizabeth and how Philip always had to walk behind her. And I always wonder if this is almost that sort of difficult position that Geoffrey had, because Matilda was not any sort of shrinking violet. And she becomes a very interesting person for that, in addition to other factors. Now, the sister of William, Rufus, and all these others, as you see, Adela was married to Count of Blois. And Blois was also near Normandy. So guess what? There will be a marriage. Adela married to Stephen of Blois. You say, had they dated? Did they fall in love instantly? I don't know. But I guess they learned to love each other. How about that? That doesn't sound very romantic, but it produces the children in a very significant relationship. And among other offspring, Stephen of Blois, I guess you could say, was a sort of hung out with his Uncle Henry. I think that's kind of interesting. You said, well, he was from Blois, but you need to get out. Blois is nice, but he was not going to be the Blois ruler. He had brothers who were ahead of him. So I guess he was sort of like one of Uncle Henry's main men. And that will become extremely significant. There is Matilda, and there is Stephen. You say, but it's Matilda's because she's the daughter. Well, Stephen, look at Stephen's mother. And she was the daughter of William the Conqueror. Now, I know they're not sitting around fighting over trees, but they're fighting over reality. But Stephen apparently wants it, and it will become a very, very significant area of fighting. So there's Stephen, and he will say, well, that's what Uncle Henry always wanted. he told me in the last years, I love my daughter very much, but I don't want her and that nasty Angevin to be rulers. But whatever the case, he claimed to be king, and now we have a period that we know in more modern times from the Irish as the Troubles between Henry and Stephen. I mean, Henry's daughter, Matilda, and Stephen. This will be known as the Anarchy. And this will go on for really years of the fighting. And you see the blue area. In other words, they would recognize the same ruler. This blue area was thanks to the uncle of Matilda, who was king of Scotland. Those Scots, see, messing around. You say, what's a Scot doing way down south? Well, I guess he was supporting his niece, but I suppose he had ulterior motives. That's just my opinion. The king of Scotland, though, and remember, you'll have that chart if you want to refer back. Maybe, I know. You can rush it out. So tonight you can go over that chart and be aware how David of Scotland was actually Matilda's uncle. Because remember, the Scots and the English, they had those connections. Thanks to the marriage of Matilda to Henry I, that started that Matilda. And now we have Matilda's uncle leading his forces, and then her brother. And you say, I love you so much, brother, even though you're a love child. I thought I was going to say a B word. But I'm not going to say anything ugly because Robert was really special. Look what his daddy gave him. The Duke of Gloucester. That's a nice gift. And yeah, I'd like to be a duke. Now, nobody's offered me a duchy. But if I had one, they apparently were very close, even though they had different mothers. I think it's very interesting. Gloucester is, again, the cathedral. Again, I feel like I'm working for some chamber of commerce. The Gloucester area is very nice, way down south. So it might be an interesting area to visit. It's not large, relatively small, but Robert of Gloucester may not be a major figure for everybody, but it's just an example of what Henry does for his children. And I guess if you're female, you get a nice
husband.
Yeah. Well, you bring your husband a little surprise gift. Remember, because you don't come for nothing. You come with lands or whatever it may be. So this war went on for years. That's a very unfortunate portrayal. I know of King Stephen. But keep thinking of Blois and what an interesting area of France it is. And forget, looks can be deceptive. I think Stephen, I'm going to say something that will sound damnable. He meant well. He's just not kingly material. I will say that sometimes when you write letters or a recommendation, you have to be real careful what you say. You don't want to say anything ugly, but then you don't want to say this is a kind of a dud. And, you don't want to be ugly. But he wasn't strong, but he meant well. And so there he was. He had some important relatives, and they, family sticks up, family feud. So the broad crowd was over there in England, standing up for him. So you have him, and get this. Now, this is another place, if you haven't been, Winchester. Remember Winchester Cathedral? Yeah. Very nice cathedral. And also, you can sing there to help you pass the miles as you're speeding along I-85. Yeah. So, Winchester was a very important bishopric, and it traditionally was the seat of the royal treasury. Yeah, you say, well, that turns me on. I'm getting, because let's face it, avarice is not limited to one generation. It continues on, because that Bishop of Winchester was well fixed, as my folks used to say. In a small town, they would always say that. What, they well fixed? Yeah. So the idea of being the Bishop of Winchester was a very, very important job. So he had all of this going for him, this Stephen of blah, but he was not necessarily a successful king. It's very difficult to be in a civil war like that. This will be known as the anarchy. This passage, and it's one of the latter passages from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, because yes, we can't just go on indefinitely. It ends about this period as we're going to get into the reign of Henry II. And basically what this says is that this was hell on earth. They didn't respect church property. And there were a lot, I'm paraphrasing. There was a lot of bad folks running around. Because sometimes I always like to say anarchy can be wonderful. Born free, remember that? I mean, you could just be, yeah, I'm just living. I guess you could be a hippie, I don't know. But anarchy in a society doesn't work too well, I would assume, unless we all want to reach out and touch and love each other. But in reality, oh, look at this. The bishops and learned men cursed them continually. And you say, oh, well, they should have done that. Yes, they should. Because, see, they messed with property. They burned the church. Neither did they spare a bishop or an abbot. How rude, yeah? So, what happened? The effect thereof was nothing, for they were all accursed, forsworn, and abandoned. Good Lord. And they said openly that Christ slept. Yeah. Anarchy is not pretty. And you think, but we can just all love each other. Yeah, it'll be beautiful. Not in this particular rendition of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And he's talking about the reign of Stephen. And of course, we understand the Civil War. And you think, law and order, remember all that? Yeah, well, there's not going to be much law and order. But for her own reasons, Matilda decided to bow out, and she and Geoffrey settled down in Normandy, which is a nice place to settle down. I have no problem there. And Stephen would become king in this so-called Treaty of Winchester. And remember, Stephen's brother was bishop there. So I assume maybe that was why they met there. Meanwhile, her cause was maintained by the son of Matilda, Henry. And from more or less the rest of the period, he would be the heir. Stephen's son had died. And I suppose reluctantly, but inevitably, Stephen said, okay, can I rule, or I will rule, as long as I'm alive, and then you can have it. And that's what they worked out. I'm not thinking that was a pleasant time, but at least the wars were ended, and I'm sure Matilda was happy to see baby boy going to be king. Although I feel like she probably thought should have been me. But now the kid, we're happy in Normandy. And we stop off at Anjou a lot. So we're having a great time. But now the kid will get, no, little Henry, he'll get to be the king. And Stephen died. You notice the years? 1153 was the treaty, and he died the next year. David, the romantic style, died of a broken heart because of his son. But whether or not that's true, he'd had, shall we say, a chaotic but eventful reign. It's just a blimp in history because the period Henry I is very significant. And of course, the tragedy of Matilda is that is Matilda, the daughter of Henry, was that she didn't get to be the ruler because of her own personality and, of course, the competition of the Blois family, leading to all that anarchy. Meanwhile, now Henry will become king, and you'll say, we're finally there. Yes, we are, the Plantagenets. Henry II, 1154 to 1189. And you say, well, do we have to know that? No. I'm sharing it because I knew you would be excited.
It's a long reign.
Yes, it is a long reign, but a very eventful reign. And if you like the Exchequer, we're going to have more Exchequer records. Yeah. So when you go to the public record office, Kew Garden is a very nice place to go if you've been there in London. Oh my gosh. You tell them I sent you, and they'll give you a special pass. And you say, does that mean we can look at Exchequer records, pipe rolls? Indeed, you can. Hours you can spend. You won't need to watch any movies. You can just work on pipe rolls and Exchequer accounts. We'll start with Henry II then next time. Come back next week, please. Okay? Thank you. Thank y'all. Thank y'all.
But